Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation to join you to talk about such an important topic for the protection of mothers and children. I'm happy to hear that the Czech Parliament is considering changes to its legislation to make sure that we do a better job with the regulation of the marketing of commercial milk formulas. I'm going to give a little bit of background. I know I'm repeating a little bit of what has been said already in the introductory remarks, but hopefully set some context for all of us today on why this is such an important issue. Next slide, please. So it's important that we start off just, yes.
Larry, can you put the translation on the original one because the echo would disappear? I'm sorry to interrupt. It was the same with me.
I'm on original audio. Not sure what else I can change here.
If you already did on the globe part, go back to the original floor and not the English translation, then it should be fine.
That is what I had done at the very beginning, but it's still coming through. It says original audio floor.
Go ahead then, thank you.
Is the sound better now?
Larry, my vás slyšíme dobře tady v místnosti.
All right, I will continue on, and you can stop me if it continues to be a problem. So first, we need to make sure that we all are on the same page with understanding the importance of breastfeeding. Globally, we lose about 600,000 children per year because of the inadequate rates of breastfeeding. Now, it is true that most of these deaths are occurring in lower income countries, but the mortality differentials are also there in high income countries. The United States itself has published that mortality rates are 26% lower among those who are breastfed. Also, exclusive breastfeeding in the first month could cut in half the rate of sudden infant death in a study that was done in Germany. Similar results have found in the United States. So it also matters for the mortality of our children. In terms of their health, it's important for improving the intelligence of our children. The estimates on average, as we look across multiple studies, is about 3.4 IQ points higher for breastfed children, even after controlling for the mother's own educational attainment and socioeconomic status. That may sound like a small difference at an individual level, but when we look at populations, this has huge implications for the development of populations. They're also more likely to be overweight if they're not breastfed, with an overall average across multiple studies of 26% lower among breastfed children compared to non-breastfed children, and also less likely to develop diabetes later in life for children. Among mothers themselves who breastfeed, there's quite a bit of evidence that they have lower rates of breast cancer, ovarian cancer, type 2 diabetes, and this is an effect that comes with a longer duration of breastfeeding. You're not going to see huge effects for just breastfeeding for a few months, but accumulative across multiple children, if they breastfeed for at least 12 months, you see these kinds of effects. Next slide, please. Because of these differences on economics, on income, et cetera, are my slides coming through? There we go. For some reason, I'm not seeing the slides on my end. I can see them in the room, so maybe we'll just go with that. Lack of breastfeeding on a global scale is also important for the economy of the world. We've looked at the cost of not breastfeeding when our breastfeeding rates are not meeting the recommendations coming from UNICEF and WHO, estimated at $341 billion globally. This comes to a 0.7% of a global gross national income that is being lost. When we look at how the world is developing, that is a huge impact for just a simple intervention in terms of breastfeeding here. When we look at that for high-income countries, it's also a very large number, $123 billion. In terms of overall percentage, it's a smaller 0.25% of the gross national income of these countries because they are higher, but definitely a large amount of money being lost because of this behavior. If we look at this in terms of the cognitive deficits from inadequate breastfeeding, we lose a major portion of that on a global level is because of the inadequate breastfeeding and cognitive deficits. And if we could actually increase this to 90% in the United States, $2.45 billion could be saved in the United States. This is not just an issue for low-income countries, definitely an interest for Europe, Australia, North America as well. Next slide, please. And we have to set the context that we have to understand there are many reasons women don't breastfeed. It's not all about the marketing of commercial milk formulas. There are issues about having enough milk and making sure we're supporting mothers so that they are able to produce enough milk. There are societal norms that are setting the standards for how women ought to be breastfeeding and how they take care of their children, and those need to be addressed. There are issues with the healthcare support and how well we support mothers and address their issues with breastfeeding. There are things that happen in the hospitals that get in the way of successful breastfeeding and make it much more difficult for mothers. We need to address all of those problems, but we need to know that the commercial milk formula marketing is also a significant determinant of how breastfeeding can be successful. And that's the issue we're going to be addressing here today. Next slide, please. It's important to recognize that commercial milk formula marketing isn't just about marketing to mothers themselves, but it actually has impacts on all of the ways that we support breastfeeding. So it has these indirect impacts. That marketing erodes away financial support. And so the kinds of investments that we make, whether it be through public funds or in healthcare, the ways that families put their own resources into this are going to be eroded if they don't think that breastfeeding is really that important. And these are the messages that marketing puts out for all of us. It changes the attitudes of families and mothers' support networks so that the kind of support, the kind of advice that they would give to their friends, to their own families will be eroded because they're also seeing those messages that the industry is putting out. It undercuts the systems of support from our healthcare providers, that they're not as able to support breastfeeding because they don't think it's as important, or they've been educated on more about formula and less about breastfeeding. And so that marketing actually shapes the kind of support that we provide to them. Next slide, please. It's important for us to recognize that marketing actually takes on a wide variety of forms. We typically think of it just in terms of the advertising that we see, what's coming across in your social media or billboards or magazines and newspapers. But marketing is much broader than that. It also deals with the labels that are put onto the cans or tins of formula and the messages that are carried there. It's about the pricing and how this is sold. You can get 50% off if you buy this along with this. Those kinds of messages are ways that we promote products and get people essentially hooked onto them. It works through gifts to healthcare providers, through influencing through conflicts of interest. It's the relationships that companies build with healthcare providers. It reshapes the science in terms of the kinds of evidence that they invest in. So they give it to researchers. So we build an evidence that is more in support of formula, and we don't invest in the research on the importance of breastfeeding. It happens through lobbying, how these companies will reach out to make sure they're making relationships with people in the government, within parliaments, within international agencies to try to change the policies that are going forward there, and therefore affecting international standards as well, such as Codex and World Trade Organizations. We can document how industry has been active in those environments to make sure that they can sell more of their products. Next slide, please. It's important to recognize, too, that the messages that are being used are extremely influential. These are not just simple messages. We'd like you ought to consider our product. They actually go at the key concerns that mothers typically have. things that they're normal behaviors that babies have. They're going to cry in the night, and so they'll come back with messages. Well, here's a formula that might help your baby sleep through the night, or your baby is fussy. Our formula is there for you, or you're concerned about the messages that you're getting and going back to work. So here we're going to help you with supplementing your baby. So it really gets at those very personal issues mothers are addressing. They include unsubstantiated claims, health claims, about what their formulas can do so that they can, your baby can sleep better through the night, or it's going to relieve colic, your baby will have better vision, they'll be smarter, this formula is hypoallergenic. And really those claims are unsubstantiated. The science behind them is extremely weak, and there's been quite a bit published on how those are largely driven by conflicts of interests, where the researchers themselves are being paid by the industries to put out studies that favor those claims, but they really don't hold up in balance in the scientific literature. They also use messages to make it seem like breastfeeding is the ideal, but impossible. That you really can't do it. This is something very hard. We're there to support you because it's going to be very difficult for you to breastfeed. And they undermine confidence in breastfeeding, telling mothers that maybe you won't have enough milk. Maybe this is going to be too hard for you. We're here to support you. And they create an artificial demand for formula. It is recognized that there are cases of babies that actually do need formula, and we need to make sure we're making it accessible to them. But the messages that actually create an artificial demand that is not real. Next slide, please. At WHO, we invested in a large multinational study that was published in 2022 to really document what is the extent of this marketing and what kinds of impacts is it having. And across these studies, we found a significant amount of exposure to milk formula advertising, even in countries that have a lot of controls put in place. And it turns out that it's largely an issue that they're not adequately enforcing these standards. Next slide, please. Just to circle there that one of the studies in this was the United Kingdom, definitely a high-income country. And in that context, 84% of mothers were commenting that they had seen ads recently in either television, social media, YouTube's as the top sources where they had seen ads from these companies. So it's actually reaching the vast majority of women in high-income countries, probably more so in many low-income countries that have stronger controls. Next slide, please. It's also become more sophisticated with digital marketing. Whereas we used to have very basic ads that were targeted to the general population, now the dominant form of marketing is happening through social media that is often not even recognized as being an ad. Mothers may not say, oh yes, I saw this ad from a company, because it's coming through as information. This is just increasing access to a particular website, or it's something that pops up in her feed as if it's something that is just general ways to feed babies, and she doesn't even recognize that this is coming from a company trying to push their products. These ads are highly targeted. They can use a lot of information from your own characteristics in social media, information about what you've been searching on, and it can turn those kinds of things directly into sales. So, for example, a mother who comes on is recognized in her persona online as being a mother of a young child. She says, how do I know if my baby is getting enough milk? And that can immediately be turned into information on coming up to the top of her feed that tells her about, well, here's this formula that you can use to feed your baby when you don't think that you're having enough milk. And here's a click on a link that you can actually go and buy that formula instantaneously before even having a chance to talk to her healthcare provider, talk to her family about, is this the right decision for her? It can immediately be turned into a sale. They use new techniques that weren't available previously in terms of working with influencers as ways to share this information as if this is another mother that is just sharing her own personal experiences, but in fact it is being paid by the ads, by the companies, word of mouth endorsements from a healthcare provider who's talking on behalf of the companies, their baby clubs that they think that they're just getting in talking to other mothers about their own experiences, not recognizing that these are actually sponsored by the formula companies themselves. Next slide, please. We also know that a lot of this marketing is happening through healthcare workers. And the way they do it shapes the knowledge of healthcare workers, the attitudes that they have, and the practices of what they actually do. They can shape the knowledge by paying for the conferences that they go to. They can travel them there. They can provide education in free service education about their formulas. They sponsor conferences in ways that can shape the agenda of what are the topics going to be shared there. So there are more sessions about formula and far fewer about how to support breastfeeding. And we also know that this kind of sponsorship changes attitudes of healthcare providers. When we receive something as a benefit to this conference, oh, this conference is being paid for here, or my travel was paid for by this company, they must be a good company, they're looking out for my best interest. It creates a sense of goodwill. This is a good company, this is an expert group that I should be listening to, and there is a natural sense, documented well in the literature, that we feel like we need to give something back. And so we need to say something good about that company to other people. And this has the impact of hurting our credibility. We no longer speak as healthcare providers who are professionals speaking on the best literature. We're speaking because now we have this relationship with the company. And ultimately, the literature is very clear in documenting that it does shape practices. We see greater prescriptions for drugs that are promoted in the same way. We see more recommendations to use formula among those who are working more closely with the formula industry. And we see limitations on the provision of better breastfeeding support when we don't have that kind of a knowledge and attitude about the importance of breastfeeding. And so it actually changes the way we support breastfeeding. Next slide, please. Ultimately, when we see all of this put together, we can see that marketing is highly effective. The companies wouldn't invest in it as much as they do. It turns out to be about $3 to $5 billion per year of these milk companies promoting their products if they didn't see that it increased their sales. And the literature is very clear in documenting it's not just a matter of promoting their product as opposed to the product of another company, that our company is just trying to take sales away from another company. While that is one effect of marketing, it also changes the shape of the entire market. It increases the demand for them among people who wouldn't even have been buying their products before. And so they are pulling away from breastfeeding when they market their products about how good their formula is. There's evidence that it is clearly correlated with lower breastfeeding rates. The more exposure we have to these ads, they have lower rates of exclusive breastfeeding, of mixed feeding are higher, and formula feeding about twice as high among people who are more exposed to these ads. And we know it's particularly effective, particularly in the digital space. It is highly cost effective. Small changes to the ways they were advertising in China, in terms of pushing more on social media, increased their sales by $2 million with just a single change in the ways that they were doing their advertising. Smartphone apps being used to promote sales in Hong Kong increased their sales by 30%. The industry knows how to do this. It is far more sophisticated than it was years ago, and that is why they're investing it as much as they are in this. Sometimes people say, well, don't we need to just balance these with the messages that we would come back with in terms of shouldn't we just be promoting breastfeeding from a public health perspective? So the Ministry of Health should be reaching out and giving more messages. Maybe we just need to invest more on the other side. And the reality is there's just no way that we are going to balance those messages. As I said a moment ago, we estimate that the marketing budget of these companies is $3 to $5 billion per year. Think about the kind of investment that the Czech Republic would have to do to balance out that kind of messaging in your country. Just to give some context to that, the WHO budget for everything that we do, whether that is immunizations or looking at climate change or building better healthcare systems, our entire budget is $2 billion a year for everything around the world. You think that we can come back with counter messages that are going to balance across what these companies are investing specifically on breast milk substitutes? It is a huge undertaking. This issue of addressing this through regulation has been on the global stage as public health policy for over 40 years. The code was passed in 1981 as a global health policy, and essentially every 2 years since then, we've had subsequent resolutions that have either clarified, added to, or reiterated the importance of this code for countries. The most recent one of those was passed just yesterday at the World Health Assembly, as was mentioned earlier, to really focus in on this growing problem of digital marketing as being something we have to address. It is something that is reiterated over and over again. It's important to understand that the code itself is not against formula. In fact, it is built into the aim of the code that we need to have proper use of breast milk substitutes when they are needed. And so we have to protect the access to these. It is not against mothers who choose to formula feed. It is against the marketing. It's a matter of our saying, how do we address how these products are promoted to mothers, to healthcare providers, to society in general? It covers a wide variety of ways that marketing is done in terms of the educational materials provided to families, promotion to the general public, retail, labeling, healthcare settings, the relationships that are allowed with healthcare workers, and how we do the monitoring of it. While it is a recommendation, as was noted earlier, from the World Health Assembly, it is considered by human rights bodies to be a core obligation of the committee, from the Committee on the Rights of the Child under the Convention on the Rights of the Child. They published this in 2016, a joint statement under the special rapporteurs of the right to food, the right to health, discrimination against women, and the rights of the child. So coming together, all of these human rights bodies are really saying we have to take action on this. It is part of the core obligations. Now, where are we to date? The good news is that most countries around the world have already put in place some aspects of the code into their national legislation. And when you look across many of World Health Assembly issues, it has not taken on, they've not gotten the pickup in countries to the extent that this has. On the other hand, most countries also leave a lot of loopholes. And we only find that there are 33 countries that are substantially aligned. That means that they're really putting in place the full set of provisions that are within the code. And so we need to do a much better job of taking this legislation and plugging holes in it. We need to do a better job with monitoring. We need to make sure that it's covering healthcare, that it really is plugging all of the holes on advertising and doesn't leave some exceptions open that you can't advertise, but maybe in this context. Ways in retail, you can't promote sales on this, but you can in this way. We really have to make sure that our legislation doesn't leave opportunities for industry to step through that. And so we need to strengthen that. And we know this works. As we look across countries that have done a better job with implementing the code and are substantially aligned, they have higher rates of exclusive breastfeeding, they have higher rates of continued breastfeeding compared to those who have legislation that has loopholes or that just have not implemented this in their legislation at all. And we also know that monitoring is a key part of that as well. Even if they have the legislation put in place, but they don't put in place key monitoring and enforcement provisions into the legislation, into the regulations, then we know that this does not have the kinds of effects that we need it to have. And so we'll get better rates of exclusive breastfeeding, of continued breastfeeding out to 2 years of age, if we actually do invest in stronger monitoring, better enforcement, have that built in to our legislative systems. I want to thank you for your attention. Next slide, just to close out. I want to thank you very much for the time to share this with you. I hope this is helpful in the debates and the considerations of what the Parliament there is going to be able to do to move this issue forward. Thank you.